Hey gamers, Maniac here with GameAccess.net, and basically I'm doing this because this is the 26th anniversary this month of its original release in Japan. I'm going to be talking about Metroid by Nintendo. Yes. For those of you who have followed my site for the last year, will probably remember I did a Metroid run last month in honor of the 25th release of the 25th anniversary of the release of Metroid in Japan. So I kind of figured, it's Metroid month. Why not do a podcast about Metroid? Why not talk about Metroid? I certainly enjoy it quite a bit. So this is gonna be a bit of an interesting podcast because I'm gonna be talking a lot about the game's history, and I'm also gonna be talking about my own experiences because I'm gonna just break this down right now. I never really played Metroid when it came out back in the day. Metroid was released for the Nintendo Entertainment System in the United States, Famicom, or if you prefer, in Japan. It also came out. Later versions came out on the Game Boy and the Super Nintendo, of which I never had any of those platforms, really. So I really can't talk about what it was like to play those games back in the day. But I have been playing the Metroid games for at least the last 10 years. And I really want to talk about the game's history, just why it's such a popular property, and what it's been like playing the Metroid games for the past 10 years. I want to talk about all that in this podcast. Metroid was the brainchild of, if I'm mispronouncing this, Gunpei Yokoi, who is probably most popular, at least being considered the father of the Game & Watch and the father of the Game Boy for Nintendo. He was one of the major Nintendo head honchos way back when. And in the heyday of the Nintendo Entertainment System, Nintendo was on the lookout for whole new properties, which were doing very well for them. I mean, obviously they had come out with Mario, they had come out with Metroid. They'd come out with Zelda. They were looking for something new. And out came this idea to do something that was kind of a mix between Mario and Zelda, but a new type of world to inhabit in, whereas opposed to instead of like a fantasy type game, here you had a science fiction type game. The game was about an alien. You played as an alien bounty hunter named Samus Aran, who is investigating basically an alien takeover of a planet by space pirates and creatures known as Metroids. Samus Aran is called in, needs to use the environment to upgrade their capabilities, and in the end, defeat the Metroids and stop the head of the space pirates known as the Mother Brain. Very, 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 very interesting concept. Totally far out there. Now, the cool thing about the game was that you had to use the items in the environment to your advantage. You started off as very weak, and as the game progressed, you would investigate the areas, and in it find little secret areas and stuff like that where you could upgrade your weapons, you can upgrade your suit, you could upgrade all your capabilities, and then you could use those capabilities to basically advance further and further and further into the game. It was a dynamite concept. And really, this was something that was quite interesting, something that we kind of had seen before, but not really on this level. And it had been imitated quite a bit since. But that was because it really just was that, a cool type of concept. I think probably it turned a lot of heads when it came out, especially when people started to realize just who Samus Aran was. I think that was probably one of the biggest shocking twists in the history of video games at that time, when Samus Aran takes off their suit. Probably one of the best videos I had seen that explained this, or explained this moment, was a bad moment. I think it was called Bad Moments in Gaming or something like that, or Moments in Gaming History, that was done by Clan of the Grey Wolf, where the Commodore was playing Metroid, and he kind of showed himself as playing Metroid as a young kid, remembering flashbacks of playing it. And as he's playing the game, again, this is young kid, so this is him as a young kid, basically. So it's kind of funny when you see a grown man basically dressed as a child and playing Metroid as if, you know, he was a kid. But, you know, it was pretty funny. So as he's playing Metroid, he's being asked by all these people to do stuff, and he's just not interested. He just wants to keep playing Metroid and hanging out with his buddy Samus Aran. And as he's playing the game, he's talking more about how manly Samus Aran is and how awesome Samus Aran is. And that he identifies so well with Samus. And finally he makes it to the end of the game, and it's of course revealed, spoilers, Samus Aran is a woman. And I think that was, seeing the Commodore's reaction of it, I think was probably a good idea, you know, a good gauge about what happened at the time. And it's a really funny video with a funny punchline. Yeah, here you had a game that was about probably one of the first major female action heroes in a video game, which was groundbreaking. You know, it was. I mean, I know I'm saying groundbreaking a lot, but it was. So, with all of that, you know, done, obviously the next interest was in a Metroid 2. Nintendo was, you know, at the time working on their properties tremendously, and the Game Boy was out. And Nintendo was, of course, interested in taking a lot of their major properties and bringing, you know, new games to the Game Boy to play. Now, the thing about Metroid was, the first Metroid, it released originally in Japan for what was called the Famicom Disk System. Now, what this was it was basically a floppy disk expansion to the original Famicom. The Famicom was what was called, what the Nintendo Entertainment System basically was called in Japan. The hardware configuration was much different. It took smaller game packs and stuff like that. So if you buy a Famicom, you can only really play Famicom games on it. You can't play United States games, and basically vice versa. It kind of looked a bit like a red Super Nintendo, and it had some things. And basically, it had a disc system that was released as an expansion. It also had other expansions, like I believe it also had a modem and stuff like that too. So Metroid was originally developed for floppy disks. Now, floppy disks are exactly what you think they are. Those are, if you can even think about what they are in the first place, 3.5-inch floppy disks, which hold a storage capacity of 1.44 megabytes. I know, it's small. And the other thing about it was that, they of course had read-write access. So, when Metroid released in Japan on the Famicom Disk System, it had the capability of saving. You could save your game and you could save your progress to the disk system because you could do that. The problem was with game packs released in the United States at that time, they were all ROMs. They were all read-only memory, and the Famicom Disk System never came over to the United States. So, when the time came to port Metroid for its US release, they had to port it from the disk system to a regular ROM cartridge. Now, that meant the save system just wasn't ready at the time when they were developing the port. There was later a battery backup system that was released, which was released for games like Legend of Zelda, but they couldn't get it they just couldn't have the technology available to them when they were porting over Metroid. It just wasn't available. I believe Legend of Zelda did release first, but at the time Metroid was released in the United States, it just for some odd reason didn't have the it wasn't an option for them to make use of a battery backup system. I don't know why. It might have been a monetary thing. It might have been a timing thing. I think it was just simply a timing thing. The hardware just wasn't ready for Metroid to make use of it when they were developing Metroid, and it was released because it was the disc system. But after Metroid 1 came out, it did make use of the password system. And to this day, people are still finding all these cool passwords that they can use in order for them to give themselves special abilities and codes and stuff like that. And that's not something that could have been possible if they had just stuck with a save state system. The passwords actually were kind of, it had its own little, positive thing. And if you don't believe me, just enter Justin Bailey into the password system for your copy of Metroid. So time progresses and Nintendo releases their handheld to the United States called the Game Boy. It was quite revolutionary in its time, in which it had, with a monochrome screen and everything else, it was great because it was good for long-term portability. The choices that they had made those made batteries last a long time. It had some really good games, released for the system. When it launched, it came with Tetris for the Game Boy, which was probably my favorite version of Tetris because it had a really good two-player connectivity. It really showed off how good the system was. You could play Tetris against your friends, and it would have you'd have a Mario or a Luigi avatar and all that cool stuff. And if so Tetris was it was great. It was a great system. But there were also going to be other games coming out for it. Of course, Mario game Super Mario Land came out for it too, which to this day is the only Mario game I've ever beat. Oh, I'm sorry, I have beat. It was the only retro Mario game I've ever beaten. I wouldn't beat another Mario game until Super Mario Galaxy came out. And I still haven't collected all the stars in that, but I did beat the end game. So, all that aside, a Metroid game was kind of like a perfect fit for it. For several reasons. One, Gunpei Yokoi, who was the father of Metroid, was also the father of the Game Boy itself. So having the two meet was a very, very, very good match. The game was a direct sequel to the first game. Metroid 2 was a direct sequel to the first game. It was never released on the Nintendo Entertainment System or on the Super Nintendo. It was a Game Boy exclusive. And the game followed Samus Aran as she was basically killing, the last of the Metroids, returning to the planet, destroying the last of the Metroids, and in the end destroying the Metroid Queen. They did make use of save states. It did carry over all of the classic Metroid gameplay that we knew from the original Metroid. The ability to upgrade your armor, the ability to upgrade your weapons, all of that good stuff. It also showed whole new enemy types, evolved versions of Metroids. We got to see those. We got to fight the Metroid Queen for the first time. It really was a fantastic game, which was quite revolutionary. And just to show you how revolutionary it was, even though the game was limited to a black and white color palette, because that was the limitations of the Game Boy, it didn't stop. They still had to consider, how do you visually show the differences when Samus Aran has been upgraded, so that the player knows what their current state is with Samus just by looking at Samus. And the cool thing about that was that, how do I put this? They had to change the physical appearance of Samus. It couldn't just be a color change. They had to literally change the armor. And that's the first time we saw Samus with the shoulder pads. And that's been a staple of the power armor ever since, of course. It's been a staple of Metroid ever since, so it was just that cool. So, Metroid 2, great game. Probably so some more time passes, and the Super Nintendo comes out. And of course, everyone's talking about, well, what's going on with the Metroid 3? Well, of course, there was a Metroid 3. It was called Super Metroid, but it was still, I believe if you load up the game, it says Metroid 3. It is considered Metroid 3, and it is a direct sequel to Metroid 2, which follows the end of Metroid 2, where Samus defeats the Metroid Queen, goes in to kill the last Metroid. It is still an egg. When the egg hatches with the last Metroid hatches, it pretty much, how do I put this? It kind of takes a almost like a maternal appearance to Samus, and basically considers Samus its mother. And with this Metroid baby, Samus makes it off the planet and donates it to science. Metroid 3, or Super Metroid, picks up identically after that ends. And we find Samus Aran in a research outpost where they're studying the baby Metroid. And it gets taken by the space pirates to be used as a weapon of war. And Samus has to go after them and kick butt and save the baby Metroid. Along the way, this is probably considered to be one of the best 2D Metroid games. I believe I've actually watched reviews of it, And everyone universally agrees that pretty much the Metroid formula had been perfected by the time Metroid 3 had come out. And that it did have superior gameplay. Of course, save states were back, and there were new types of abilities that Samus could make use of, and just all this type of cool stuff. And of course, with the enhanced graphics of the Super Nintendo, it was just a classic. So Metroid 3 ends, or Super Metroid ends, with the resurrection of Mother Brain, but also the reveal that the baby had eventually turned evil, or that stuff had been done to it. The baby had grown, and the baby was now evil. When Samus fights at the very end against the resurrected Mother Brain, the baby becomes good, saves Samus from Mother Brain before Mother Brain can deliver the killing blow, and is killed in the process. The baby literally sacrifices itself to save its mother, which was probably quite traumatic to some children. But, let's face it, a pretty awesome ending. So Metroid 3 comes out, and after that, Metroid really goes dark. And I mean very dark. The problem with it was that nobody had really seen it for many years after that. There wasn't any more Metroid games released on the Super Nintendo. And when the Nintendo 64 and other when other platforms were being taken out by Nintendo, nobody was really was really talking about it. By the time the by the time the Nintendo 64 came out, by the time the Virtual Boy came out, there wasn't really any Metroid games coming out. I mean, you could have thought maybe it might have shown up on like the Virtual Boy or something, but of course the Virtual Boy was discontinued only after a couple of months. So the time for a Metroid game to come out on it, I guess, wasn't good. Wasn't enough. There wasn't enough time to make a Metroid game for it before the platform was discontinued. Although I would have thought that the Virtual Boy could have been a good fit for. Of course, well, you could argue nothing would be a good fit for the Virtual Boy. The Virtual Boy was a bad idea even in design. So I'll give you that. So Gunpei Yokoi leaves Nintendo shortly after the Virtual Boy. And then like a year later or 2 years later, he gets killed in a car accident. I know a lot of people have cited possibility of foul play about that. I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole or anything like that. But his death, all death is a tragedy. So his death, of course, very tragic. And I believe that Nintendo lost a serious guiding light on that one. And basically, don't get me wrong, they found a good one with, of course, Shigeru Miyamoto. But just imagine what would happen if those two were still together. So, time passes, but everyone is still really talking about Metroid. In fact, I remember probably about 12 years ago, the Penny Arcade guys did a thing about it. They did a 3-issue, a 3-strip mini-series in it where basically Gabe wants to bring Metroid back, wants to make Nintendo bring Metroid back. And in classic Penny Arcade fashion, Gabe says he's going to kidnap what he calls the creator of Metroid, Shigeru Miyamoto. Now, they did acknowledge, even when that comic strip came out, that, yeah, they knew that it was Gunpei Yokoi, but he was dead, so they couldn't, claim to kidnap him. So they figured that Gabe would just be silly and just kidnap Shigeru Miyamoto. And in the next strip, which is really funny, it's literally just these lines repeated, where Gabe calls Taiko and says, "I just kidnapped Shigeru Miyamoto and stole a police car." And then Taiko says, "Oh, that's funny. It just sounds like you just kidnapped Shigeru Miyamoto and stole a police car." And in the very end, everyone, the third strip, everyone is like, okay. And Shigeru Miyamoto, who is drawn very young, basically just wearing a Nintendo 64 type logo T-shirt, which that's an awesome logo. Just says something in Japanese and they all laugh, and that's the end of the series. So I guess it's all let bygones be bygones or something like that. It was a really funny mini-series. It was kind of because it was just how out there it was. I don't know if they offended anyone. I hope they didn't, because I'm sure it was just parody or something. But I thought it was a funny series, and I think was at the time I started reading Penny Arcade, I think that was the series that they were doing. So that just means something to me. Of course, all Gabe really had to do was wait about 2 more years, because when the GameCube came out, so did a new Metroid game, and that's when I finally threw my hat into the Metroid ring. In 2002. There was the announcement that two Metroid games were coming out: Metroid Fusion for the Game Boy Advance and Metroid Prime for the GameCube. The GameCube by that point was still slumping in sales. It was ranked third amongst the consoles of that generation in sales. It was. It just didn't have the major games at launch, but when people started talking about Metroid Prime, here was a game that was being developed by kind of an unknown studios that was mostly owned by Nintendo, and when Retro Studios was bought by Nintendo, there was been a lot of talk about what was the history behind all that. Retro Studios wanted to have the capability of basically having, a good solid monetary compensation for what they were doing. So being mostly owned by Nintendo, they kind of called them a second party developer, and making Nintendo exclusive games kind of gave them the financial stability for game development. And here was a property that Nintendo had. It was exclusive to them, but they hadn't really done anything with it in a long time. So it was kind of an interesting capability for Retro, because they could take a known property, but kind of a property that had been in the dark for a while, and do something new with it, and kind of reinvigorate it, and take full advantage of this new platform that Nintendo had. They also could take, because Nintendo had multiple peripherals out there, do connectivity between the peripherals. So anybody that had both a Game Boy Advance and a copy of Metroid Prime, if they bought this other Metroid game, Metroid Fusion, there could be connectivity and extra bonuses for the player. And that was something that Nintendo was experimenting with in that generation, and trust me, they probably did a lot of it. And now, of course, everyone knows that that's coming with the PS Vita and the PlayStation 3. Everyone's talking about that right now. But Nintendo did it way, way, way before then. Sorry, I'm just having... I did not mean for that water to be drank that loudly. So, when Metroid Prime comes out, I think, and I start seeing, it just wows all the critics and reviewers. It gets very high scores by the critics and the reviewers, and everyone gets seriously interested in this property, and then everyone starts realizing, oh, by the way, this is also a property that has been around for a while. In fact, actually, you could unlock the original Metroid game in Metroid Prime, just to show you that. It later got taken out of when they did the Wii re-release. That functionality got taken out, but you can still download the game, no problem, on the Wii Virtual Console. That was a fair trade-off, especially given the fact that it wasn't necessary. It wasn't necessary because you already had that, and on top of that, nobody really, uses the Game Boy Advance and the Game Boy Advance connectivity. It wasn't something that would be really taken advantage of in the Wii, except I think backwards compatible Wii's could have done, could have taken it. You know what? I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. I'll talk more about the Wii when we get to that. So at that point, I'm reading all these, reviews and watching all these reviews of Metroid Prime, and at this point, I'm starting to think I've got to get my hands on this game. And it had just gotten re-released to the Player's Choice, which is basically their greatest hits version. It's Nintendo's greatest hits version. Is called the Player's Choice version. And what really interested me was that. That really interested me. So I had a friend that had a GameCube, but was short on cash and wanted to sell it. I offered him a few dollars for it. I think I paid, maybe around $50 for it or something along those lines. And I basically bought Nintendo games with it. Because there was actually, that was the first console that I had bought in many, many, many years. I had never really bought a console. I was a PC gamer that whole time. And it kind of felt to me that amongst all the platforms and everything else, it was the Nintendo GameCube that had the most unique exclusives. And out of that generation, the first game console that I had bought of that generation was the GameCube. And I was playing games like Metroid Prime and Star Fox Adventures and the Twin Snakes on it. Just a whole bunch of stuff that was coming out around that time. So, after all that having been said, later that year, Nintendo announces that they're doing something kind of cool. They're releasing a prize pack, basically. It was almost like a precursor to Club Nintendo. I think it came out around, I don't know, 2003 or 2004 or so. Where if you picked up a Nintendo game, either before the Game Boy Advance or the GameCube, and you registered a GameCube, and you could register your GameCube serial number. You could also register the game codes to their site. And if you did that, if you registered like 5 game codes or something like that, then they would give you a special bonus disc, which would have on it the first game information and demo for Metroid Prime 2. I mean, I think at the time Metroid Prime was probably the GameCube's best exclusive property. This was probably before Super Smash Bros. And stuff like that. So, because obviously nowadays probably people think back at the GameCube and they think Mario Kart, Double Dash, and Super Smash Bros. But at the time it was basically Metroid Prime, and they were ready to come out with Metroid Prime 2 at the end of 2004, just to be in time for Christmas. So I got really interested in Metroid Prime 2, and they kind of did the major announcements for it because they were selling a bundled console. They sold a bundled console. It was a special edition console. It was silver, and it was bundled with a copy of Metroid Prime, the original, with the Metroid Prime 2 bonus disc on it. If you're looking at this podcast in video, you'll probably see the possibility exists that you've probably seen a picture by this point. If not, you're going to see a picture of that exact package in one of these photos. I sold my friend back his Xbox for exactly what I paid him for it. I sold it back to him, and I went out and bought a full-priced GameCube for $100, which is what they cost at the time, and got the extra bonus disc. The downside of that was that the later revisions of the Nintendo GameCube, and this was a major oversight for Nintendo, they should not have done this, was they discontinued the progressive scan capabilities of the platform. So the later GameCubes, which are the cheaper GameCubes, I admit that, but they were the ones that came bundled with games. They took out the progressive scan output, the progressive scan video output. And my friend's original one did actually have a progressive scan output. It was just in really bad shape. I guess when he bought it, somebody had kicked it around or something. And I had also bought a progressive scan cable. Yeah, at the time, progressive scan cables could only be bought through Nintendo of America's website, which was fine. You could get it in like a couple bucks and just a few days shipping pretty quickly. Nintendo still to this day does a really good job of selling the peripherals very easy on their website. I've had friends that have lost like Game Boy chargers and stuff like that, and been able to replace them for very, very inexpensive costs. So props for Nintendo for that. And what had happened was that I ended up having to sell my cable. I think I sold it to Twitch, who had a GameCube that was able to do it. So if I had one complaint about that GameCube generation, it was that they took out the progressive scan functionality. And of course, when the Nintendo Wii came out, which I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but when the Nintendo Wii came out, they changed the port type. So the Nintendo Wii has its own video port. And so the cables aren't compatible anymore, but the cables were compatible. If you had a cable for the original GameCube and you had a cable for the Super Nintendo, they would work. But if you had a cable for the Wii, it's not going to work on any of the older systems. So I think that was probably why they just changed the port for the Wii, because they wanted to have progressive scan and standard definition capabilities in one port, and they had to change it for that. So that's kind of sad, but I guess that's the time. So back to Metroid. I'm getting a little bit sidetracked, but this was Metroid related. Metroid Prime 2 comes out. Now, by this point, I am in the process of playing through Metroid. And by the way, I'm loving every second of it. But I'm a completionist. So, Metroid Prime, in its design, had two basic things about it. One was you had to fully upgrade your armor with all the capabilities, rockets, all your special suit upgrades, and everything else. But you also had you had to find and scan everything, all the enemy types, all the bosses, certain logs and stuff like that. And the thing about that was that you never really knew. There was just so much stuff all over the environment. You never really knew when you were looking at it what was going to be something that you could scan that would be savable, or what was going to be something that you scan that you really didn't need to scan. It did make navigating the environments a lot easier, but it basically made me go absolutely crazy with all the stuff I had to scan and look up and everything else. So I eventually got to a point where I got stuck. In fact, I got really stuck in the game. And I really didn't want to go back to playing it, really. So I basically, I think I might have been halfway through the game. I might have been 2/3 of the way through the game. It was a long game. I think when I beat it, when I finally did beat it years later, I think it took me around 15 or 16 hours to beat the game with 100% completion. So it was a pretty long game. And so I don't regret that, of course. But it was a lot of fun, too. So some time progresses, and Metroid Prime 2 comes out, and I asked for it for Christmas, and I got it. And this was like Metroid Prime 2 was kind of revolutionary in the fact that it was the first Metroid game to really have multiplayer. And it wasn't online multiplayer, it was split-screen multiplayer, which was disappointing, because the Nintendo GameCube did have online multiplayer capabilities. All you had to do was just go out and buy like an internet adapter for your system, and they did offer both an internet adapter for Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi for high speed for Ethernet, and they offered a modem. The problem was that the games had to actually have all the online capabilities coded into the device itself, the game itself. There wasn't really an Xbox Live service for the GameCube. So you couldn't just like load up the console itself and then just, go onto the internet and update your firmware and everything else. That wasn't possible. But if you had a game that took advantage of it, you could have the game dial up your ISP and you could play your game, or you could go into your Ethernet connection and just surf, play your game online, that sort of thing. So it was possible, but they didn't make use of it. The only multiplayer for Metroid Prime 2 was split screen. Now, don't get me wrong, the GameCube did support 4-player split screen because it had 4 controllers, ports. But yeah, it would have been cool if it had online multiplayer. So, the game then goes dark again. Metroid Prime 2 comes out, but the problem with it was that it came out around a time when, this was 2004, this was probably the biggest gaming release year of that time ever. You had all of these games coming out on all these different platforms, all of them pretty much Game of the Year contenders for each of their platforms. Let me just give you a rundown about what came out that year. Doom 3 came out that year. Half-Life 2 came out that year. Halo 2 came out that year. Metal Gear Solid 3 came out that year. There were a lot of major releases for 2004. A lot. And they all were out by Christmas. So, I mean, even on the GameCube, there was, of course, Paper Mario Thousand Year Door. I don't remember if Super Smash Bros. Came out that year. Somebody can probably post a comment if it did. I don't know if it did or not. But that was that. That was that. And that was a problem, So I remember it starting to play it, but then thinking to myself, I really should beat Metroid Prime 1 before it comes out. So but unfortunately I never went back to playing Metroid Prime 1, so I just didn't know if that was a good idea. So Nintendo announces the DS, the Nintendo Dual Screen, which was their first handheld. It was like their handheld successor to the Game Boy, which is what it was. Everyone expected it to be extremely popular handheld, and it was. Don't get me wrong, it was. It was the winning handheld of that generation, so everyone was expecting good things from it. Sony was primed to take the handheld space with their own answer to it, the PlayStation Portable. Everyone was universally betting on Nintendo because, of course, Nintendo had always ruled the handheld scene, even though they hadn't ruled the console scene that year. And with the release of the Nintendo DS came a Metroid Prime game demo for it. And it was Metroid Prime Hunters. So I guess they really wanted to sell a Metroid game with the DS, so they decided to do Metroid Prime with it. Metroid Prime Hunters. And to be perfectly honest, the demo of Metroid Prime Hunters was really nothing like the final version of it. The final version of Metroid Prime Hunters actually kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed. But it was the next Metroid game to come out. And it was on a handheld. And I haven't played it because I don't have a Nintendo DS, but I am seriously probably going to get a Nintendo 3DS next week when the 3DS XL comes out. So I'm probably going to go back and start looking for Metroid games at when that comes out or around that time. And so, think for that what you will. But the cool thing about it was that, how do I put this? It did have online capabilities for multiplayer and stuff like that. It also had scans. It carried over the console capabilities and brought it in along with new features like Wi-Fi multiplayer and all that other stuff. So Hunters was a great experiment. It was a good decision on Nintendo's part to do that. Now, then around 2006, 2007, everyone starts really talking about the Nintendo Wii. Everyone is talking about that. Why? Because you couldn't not. I mean, Nintendo Wii was the buzzword for that, for that next upcoming generation. Of course, everyone was talking about the Xbox 360, which came out in 2005. Everyone was talking about the PlayStation 3 because the PlayStation had been the popular platform for that year. For the last two console generations, Sony had been the winner. Everyone was expecting the PlayStation 3 to also win that console generation. And here was the Wii. And it had whole new capabilities that nobody had really seen before. It was quite revolutionary. And it just didn't have the graphical capabilities, or I should say the hardware, the processing hardware that the other consoles had. It just had a really interesting type of motion control system that the other consoles really didn't. It also had the first party support of Nintendo and all the Nintendo properties. There would be a Mario game for it. There would be a Zelda game for it. There would be a, And then they said, by the way, there will also be a Metroid game for it. And they announced Metroid Prime 3. And I think that for me was like the one game that I was really looking forward to for the Wii. Forget about the other ones. I was really looking at the Metroid Prime 3. So if you actually think about it, historically speaking, Metroid had been the system seller for me for basically the Nintendo generations as of recent. So go figure on that one. I was really looking forward to it. So a year passes, and Metroid Prime 3 does finally come out. And here they were saying that this was going to be something that was major revolutionary. Here you had a first-person game, which everyone had known on the controller, basically being played with the Wiimote. Everyone thought, well, this could either work really well or really badly. But the initial, the time had been taken. Metroid Prime 3 had been delayed. I think it was originally supposed to be a launch title. Nintendo kept delaying it. And I think it came out probably around a year after it was originally intended to come out. And the reviews of it, I believe, were quite good. And having played it, I can tell you that they made that control system work. They really made that control system work. So I pick up Metroid Prime 3 along with a stack of other Wii exclusive games that I absolutely had to get my hands on. When I finally do get a Wii about 2 years after it came out, because, well, let's face it, Nintendo Wiis were ungettable until about 2008 at least. They just were selling out everywhere. Stores couldn't stock them. They couldn't keep them in stock. So the Nintendo Wii happens, And I finally get one. And one of the first games I do pick up on it is Metroid Prime 3, of course. Now, the game interests me a lot, but really what I wanted to do was go back and play Metroid Prime 1, Metroid Prime 2, and then play Metroid Prime 3 third. I kind of wanted to do that, and that of course meant going back and replaying Metroid Prime. But it had been so many years since I had played Metroid Prime, I really didn't know if I had it in me to go back and replay the game all from scratch. So I kind of delayed on that. Some time passed, and I believe it was E3 2009, and I was watching the Nintendo Live press conference, and they were showing off all the new stuff that was going on with the Wii and all the new games that they were working on with the Wii. I believe they showed the new Zelda. They might have showed the new Zelda game. I don't think they did. They did show the Super Mario Galaxy 2 and all that stuff. But I think what really made it popular was when they showed the next Metroid game, which was going to be, kind of a game that was going to go back into continuity and not be its own type of continuity. It'd basically be Metroid Other M. They showed a cinematic trailer for it. They said it was being done by Team Ninja, the Dead or Alive and Ninja Gaiden developers. And they showed this trailer that just wowed everybody. And everyone was looking forward to it. Especially me. I was really looking forward to it. So, Metroid Other M comes out, I believe it was a year later, in 2010. And I basically put the other Metroid games on the back burner again because I was figuring, well, Metroid Other M is back in continuity. And by the way, I did download, in the fact of the other reason why I got the Wii was not only because it had good games for the system itself, but the Wii Virtual Console allowed me to go back and purchase all the Metroid games that I had missed out, as well as the Zelda games and the Mario games that I missed out on. I was disappointed that they never released the any Game Boy games for the Virtual Console for the Wii, but as far as I know, they are releasing Game Boy games for the Virtual Console for the Nintendo 3DS and DS XL. That having been said, Pokemon, can you guys release Pokemon, the Pokemon games, the early Pokemon games for the Game Boy? I'd really appreciate that. Because if there's like some early Game Boy games I would really like to get my hands on, and I will be more than happy to purchase and to download them to my DS whenever I get one, would be Pokemon games. So Metroid Other M comes out, and there was a really interesting ad campaign behind it. It was different than the Metroid campaigns that had been gone before it, because the Metroid campaigns that had kind of gone before it was, and in fact, if you guys have seen my my Metroid, or I should say my top video games commercials video, and if you don't, just look at my channel and you'll find it. I count down the top 10 video game commercials of all time that it aired on TV. Number 11 actually was Metroid Other M's TV commercial, because it had a really interesting ad campaign. And if you look at it really closely, having played the game, it really did fit perfectly in the continuity of it. They also had a very interesting online ad campaign as well, where they were basically doing almost like a retrospective of the Metroid games. And I think what really interested me in the Metroid games again was that a very similar retrospective, but a much, much lengthier retrospective, a fantastic retrospective, was done by Game Trailers shortly before the release of Metroid Prime 3 on the Wii. And I love video game documentaries and stuff like that, but these documentaries that Game Trailers had done were phenomenal, really phenomenal. And they talked about the history of Samus Aran, how Samus Aran got her abilities, what had happened to her when she was growing up, and what the game's continuities were, and the timeline of the games and everything, and they finally did a wrap-up about all that stuff. So they talked about each of the individual games, and then finally they wrapped it up with a timeline. They didn't talk about Metroid Prime 3 at all, because the game hadn't come out yet. So they couldn't really talk about that, which was kind of disappointing. I do think that Game Trailers should go back. Maybe if there's another Metroid game, they should go back to that retrospective and release more episodes. They should talk about Metroid Prime 3 and Metroid Other M, certainly, in the continuity. So, if you haven't seen that, look it up. is really good. Just go to GameChoice.com and look at the retrospectives and just watch the Metroid retrospectives. Trust me, you'll watch all 5 parts. You won't. They really are that good. So after that, I pick up Metroid Other M. And some of the things I thought were interesting about it were, at least when it was the time leading up to it, were that one, it was in continuity with the Metroid series. It wasn't part of Metroid Prime series. It was kind of part of, like, it followed Super Metroid. So this was like a sequel to Super Metroid. So basically it was like a Metroid 4 almost. And also the cool thing about it was that you know, it had like all the it had cinematics and in-game cinematics and all this other stuff. And the cool thing was that it had so many cinematics that they actually put a cinematic viewer, and they said that they were going to actually cut an actual movie, a machinima movie, with the cutscene viewer. So if you watch it, you could basically watch the whole thing with a bowl of popcorn and catch the whole thing. And I thought that was interesting. And maybe someday I might actually do a commentary on that. If I don't know if I will, but someday I might actually do a commentary on that movie. I'm sorry, on the game's movie. So we'll see what people think about that. Certainly post a comment if you think that'd be interesting. So I played through the game, and to me, I'm immediately interested in it because here's a Metroid game that I thought I could probably play. In the fact that there was 100% capabilities with the game, but you didn't have to scan, you just had to upgrade Samus with all of Samus's new abilities and everything else. Also, you know, you had to expand energy tanks, and you had to expand missile tanks and all that other stuff. But you didn't have to do scans. There were no scan outposts. There were plenty of save spots, you know, all that kind of stuff. So, to me, it felt like at least it was going to be easier than Metroid Prime was, and probably less time-consuming and less difficult. And on top of that, it was going to be all the cinematics. So immediately, I was interested in it. I popped the game into my Wii, and I played through the whole thing. I beat it. I 100%ed it. I was actually pretty satisfied with the game. There were a few moments in the game that I thought was kind of interesting. I'm not going to go too much into depth about my thoughts of it. I'll probably save that for another video, or if I ever do a So What Happened. I was rewatching the cinematics last night when I was in preparation for this podcast, and I thought to myself, you know, I might do a So What Happened for that. I might have to, because it was a complicated story, nevertheless, but it was certainly followable, and it kind of tucked into a spot of Samus that most of the gamers really hadn't seen before. I know a lot of critics cried foul about it, but when I saw some of the critiques of it, other people called foul, and the critics actually, I had actually seen the critics that were being called foul, literally being called foul on by the gamers. Like, the gamers said, "Oh, this critic said that you couldn't do this, but you actually can. You know, you actually can." And so, you know, like that's a foul as far as they were concerned and stuff like that. Now, I'm not going to go too much into how I feel about what they did with Samus Aran. Like I said, that would probably be better suited for like a So What Happened or something. And I don't really want to do that. But I did feel like the game had been one pretty much coherent story. And I did feel like, I did like the gameplay quite a bit. I thought it took really good advantage of the Wii's capabilities. It was kind of retro, but yet modern at the same respect of basically how you had how you held the nunchuck, how you held the Wiimote. You held it like a regular Nintendo controller, and then when you wanted rockets, you could turn it so you'd make use of the Wii's functionality. You could shake if you wanted to dodge, that sort of thing. I liked the story. I admit this, I did like the story. And it was a lot less time-consuming, a lot less busy work because there was no scanning needed. You could play, than the Metroid Prime games did. So when I beat the game, I 100%ed it. The thing was, when you beat the game and you 100% it, there's really no reason to go back and play it, other than to get 100%. Once you've got 100%, there's really no incentive to go back and play it again. 100%ing it will unlock all the cinematics, and it will unlock all of the, the concept art or post, the gallery, the picture gallery. So that was basically it. And when the time came, when Metroid Month happened last year, when August of last year came out, and everyone announced, oh, by the way, it's the 25th anniversary of Metroid, I knew I kind of had to do something, and I knew that the time was right for me to go pick up a Metroid game, or for me to start to do like almost like a Metroid Prime run. Because by that point, Metroid Prime Trilogy had come out. I can't remember if it came out before Other M. It probably did. I think it did come out before Other M. It was released almost like a collector's edition with all of the Metroid Prime games, Metroid Prime 1, 2, and 3, on one Wii disc. And basically, it was the two Metroid Prime games, the two original Metroid Prime games, ported over to the Wii. At the time, the Nintendo guys were going back and porting some of their GameCube games to the Wii, and making use of the Wiimote controllers and stuff like that, so you could play the game, but not have to have a GameCube memory card, not have to have an original Wavebird controller or anything like that. And that wasn't the first game they had done it on. I think they were also doing it for games like Pikmin. I've seen other games updated to the Wii capabilities, so that has certainly happened. But Metroid Prime Trilogy is one of those rare games, because it was 50 when it launched, and shortly after they did their printing, they discontinued the game. And trust me, when they announced that they were discontinuing it, I immediately went out and bought a copy of it, even though I already had Metroid Prime 1, 2, and 3. I wanted to have the Metroid Prime Trilogy just based upon that alone. And let me tell you something, I made a good decision, because even used copies of that game right now cost $60. So I'm already got a $10 payoff on that investment. Sorry about that. So, what can I say about that? What can I say about the game? What can I say about the game system? That sort of thing. What can be said? I spent the month when I announced this, and this is, I think, the first time I ever really threw my hat into this. I had previously on the site made announcements and stuff like that, but sometimes I just couldn't make it for one way or another. I just couldn't do it. When I made the announcement that I was going to do a Metroid Prime Trilogy run through all the Metroid Prime games, and basically keep a Twitter feed and that sort of thing, I was going to do it. I swore I was going to do it. And you know what? It was a good thing that I chose to do it when I did, because partway through me playing through Metroid Prime 2, as I was 100% completing it, Hurricane Irene happened. And I didn't lose power from Hurricane Irene. Many people did. But I did lose my internet access completely, with the exception of cellular capabilities, which were very, very slow, very limited. I lost all my internet capabilities, which meant that I didn't have access to Xbox Live, I didn't have access to the PlayStation Network. But I didn't really need access to the Wii's capability, Wii's, because Metroid Prime games didn't need internet access, except when you were wanting to trade over friend vouchers to your friends for green credits. And I'll get into that later. So, my promise to you guys was that I was going to basically 100% all the games. And I actually, even with Hurricane Irene happening, I was able to actually continue to progress. And I specifically remember the day Hurricane Irene, the few days after Hurricane Irene happened, the day that internet came back. And I know a lot of people complain about this, and a lot of people talk about their problem with green credits and stuff like that. Basically, green credits in Metroid Prime 3, they did carry over to Metroid Prime Trilogy. Basically, you unlock weapons and abilities and stuff like that in the Metroid Prime games. In Metroid Prime 3, basically by earning credits. You can earn the credits basically by things like scans, defeating bosses, upgrading your suit capabilities, and basically getting getting them from friends. And sure enough, what had happened was that my neighbor, and this is the easiest thing, everyone will say back and forth, is like, oh, I'll send you credits if you send me credits, here's my friend code, and that sort of thing. But it's actually much easier, and this works for both Metroid Prime 3 and Metroid Prime Trilogy, is to just take your copy of the game, go over to a friend's house that has a Wii, friend them if you haven't already friended them, make sure you get their friend code and make sure they friended you, earn some credits on your copy of Metroid Prime Trilogy, You're going to need about a minimum of about 15 or so. And just have them sent over to you, and that's it. You don't have to worry about having 2 games or something like that. You just play it over a friend's, earn the green credits, and then send them to yourself. It's the easiest thing you can do. And it works. And that's pretty much how I earn my green credits. I brought him over to Disc Reader's house. I played it on his way. In fact, there's a video about, I'm not going to tell you guys here. You can just go looking for the video. But there was a video I did with him where we got easy friend vouchers, basically by racking up kills in a certain spot in the game, which is allowed by the system. And once we hit the limit, we just basically continued on. But then I just sent the friend vouchers that I earned to myself. And later on, I got like more later or something. And that's really how you do it. Just have a friend with a Wii. He doesn't need to have a copy of the, or she doesn't need to have a copy of the game. If you earn any friend vouchers, certainly you can give them away, but you only need 15 of them. And the game offers a lot more than that. There were some friend voucher spots in the game that were, very difficult for me, so I kind of skipped those. I did not really consider those necessary for 100% completion, because by the end of it, even if you get all the friend vouchers, you can't use them on yourself. So it's actually easier just to go over your friends, earn 15 friend vouchers for whatever reason, and then just go back to and you can just earn whatever you have to for yourself and then send them over for whatever. You don't need to worry about that. And like I said, your friend only has to send you 15 and you'll unlock everything. So, I'm rambling a bit here. That was, I think, the toughest thing about the Metroid Prime run, was actually in making sure that I've scanned everything. I didn't have too much of a problem by the end of Metroid Prime, the first Metroid Prime game. I was able to power through it. If I could make some comments about it, I did later go back and replay the original Metroid Prime on the original GameCube version and 100% that as well. If I could make one comment about that, it's that Ridley is much, much, much harder on the Wii version. Because there's no lock-on aim, really, and you have to hit Ridley precisely in the head. On the GameCube version, you can just target Ridley's head, lock directly onto it, and fire. And it took me about at least an hour on the Wii. It took me no time whatsoever on the GameCube, and that was surprising. Ridley had killed me a few times on the Wii. Maybe I learned the pattern. I don't know. So all that having been said, what did I think of the games? I think I like Metroid Prime the best. Metroid Prime 3 was a close second, if not tied for first. In the bronze was definitely Metroid Prime 2. I don't know exactly what was going on with Metroid Prime 2, but I had a few problems with it. I didn't like the suit designs as much for the Metroid Prime 2. They kind of just, the colors didn't work for me, although I know that what they were going for. I didn't really like the suit designs or the colors. I thought that Metroid Prime, the original Metroid Prime game, probably had the best, most classic look for the suits, but I really like the suit designs, especially with the later Phazon suits and stuff like that, for Metroid Prime 3. I thought the overarching story among the 3 games was fascinating, where Samus is fighting Dark Samus, the creation of Dark Samus and everything like that, involving like what happened with 100%ing in the game and everything else. I did want to get the 100% endings for all the games. I liked that Metroid Prime ended with a nod to the first Metroid Prime game where Samus took off her helmet. That was, I thought, really cool, and that the end game, the end game final tally game actually showed that. They didn't bring that over for Metroid Prime 2, and they really didn't bring that over for Metroid Prime 3. Even with 100% completion, I didn't see an image of Samus with her helmet off in the other versions. But I did get all the special endings for all of the other games. Yeah, it was more than just a game completion screen. It was also 100% completion screen, really. So, I went back and I replayed Metroid Prime. I should probably, I probably should go back and replay Metroid Prime 2 on the GameCube version, and probably replay the original version of Metroid Prime 3. I should go back and do that, actually. I did, just to be safe, I did actually send myself the friend vouchers for Metroid Prime 3. because I actually still have a copy of that. So I did when I sent myself friend vouchers, I also sent myself friend vouchers for Metroid Prime 3 as well as Metroid Prime Trilogy, because they are not cross-compatible. If you have Metroid Prime Trilogy, you must get codes from Metroid Prime Trilogy. If you have Metroid Prime 3, you must have codes for Metroid Prime 3. Other things to remember when you're trying to send friend codes: you must have your friend registered, and your friend must have you registered. You must also have WeConnect 24 turned on. Otherwise, it won't be possible for you to send friend codes. Either your name won't show up in the friend codes listings, or what's the other thing? Or it'll be grayed out, and it won't allow you to send the codes. It won't allow you to send. Yeah, it won't allow you to send the friend vouchers. So, just remember that. What is coming with the future? Well, Nintendo has two platforms, that are coming out. The Nintendo 3DS XL is coming out next week. The Nintendo Wii U is coming out probably towards the end of this year. They are working on all their other platforms. Now, I watched I watched this year's E3 press conference. I also watched this year's E3 press conference for the 3DS, which focused on the 3DS, and I think that conference is what, convinced me to get a 3DS, because I got to see not only what the games are currently out, but what is coming out, and that was enough to wow me to buy a 3DS. And with the announcement, I was actually going to buy one just leading up to the time of the 3DS XL announcement, and then the 3DS XL announcement happened. And I said, nope, wait until August. Wait until August on that one. So, yeah, there was that. So, where is the future with that? What's the future with Metroid? Now, here's where the funny part's going to be. They haven't announced any more Metroid games, at least not as of recently. That's not to say that they're not developing any. They just haven't announced any more Metroid games coming out. Could the possibility certainly exist that more Metroid games will be coming out with the new platforms? Absolutely. In fact, I would say probably it's more likely than ever Metroid games are going to be coming out, because you have, number one, the 3DS, and number two, you have the Wii U. Nintendo always releases, games from their popular franchises whenever they do a new hardware revision. And the new hardware revisions are out. It's highly, highly likely that one of their big three properties will return. And, you could say, well, what are they going to be doing next? I honestly, after Metroid Other M, I think they might go back and make a new Metroid Prime game. Certainly, it could happen that they could do another 2D Metroid game, like as for a downloadable release, because the 3DS does support downloadable games. The Wii U probably also will as well, but they haven't really gone too much into what's going on with downloadable capabilities, except that they said they will be having internet support and online support for the Wii U. It would make sense for them to have like an online store like they had with the other platforms, because I'm sure that's done very well for them. I will be talking more about the Wii U later. I'm holding off most discussion about that. If you're interested in a 3DS discussion on the site, wait till next week when I finally get one. When I get the XL, I will be doing plenty of coverage on the 3DS XL and the 3DS in general and the DS in general after the 3DS XL comes out, because I've never owned a DS and I've never owned a 3DS. So this is whole new territory for me. So I'm going to have plenty to say about it once I get that platform for next week. So please hold off on that. If you guys have a list of games that you think I should pick up for either platform, the DS or the 3DS, feel free to comment on that. I do have my own list of games that I do want to pick up. Some of them for the DS, some of them for the 3DS. But, and in fact, I actually did do a little bit of shopping today through various stores. I was kind of greatly disappointed about the stock of many DS games, but I'm probably going to be spending most of my time shopping on Amazon for some of the older DS games that I want. They had some pretty reasonable prices for some older DS exclusive games that I wanted to pick up. But I didn't find any of them in stores I was looking at. So there you have it, guys. There's Metroid in a nutshell. I really can't wait for another Metroid game. I'm a huge Metroid fan. Maybe this month I should spend the time and go back and replay Metroid Prime 2 and Metroid Prime 3 on their original in their original game SKUs. Obviously, obviously I already beat Metroid. I went back and I did beat Metroid Prime on the GameCube, so there was that. I want to hear your comments on this podcast, of course, as usual, guys. Until next time, guys. This is Maniac over and out. Thanks for listening.